Hey guys, how's it going? Kevin Cleary here with a knife video for you. Today is going to be my full review and discussion of the SOG Flash AT. Now, I've reviewed the original SOG Flash and it wasn't a bad knife. And like many SOGs, it did have that blade play that was pretty typical of all of the knives that had that horrible lock. And if you look in SOG's description on Blade HQ or Knife Center or wherever else, you'll find it called the plunge lock. And it was sort of an arcish lock looking thing. It was SOG's less than ideal response or competitor to the Axis lock. And thankfully, thinking of the Axis lock, Benchmade's patent on the Axis lock has run out, and so now SOG is using what they're calling the AT lock, or in this case, when it's combined with the assist, I guess it's ATXR. So very, very big upgrade. I will say that right off the bat. So I've had, as I said, compared to the original SOG Flash, and I've had the original Trident, I've had the original Flash, I've had the original Aegis, I've even tried a couple other SOGs, and generally I had kind of given up on them because I was just so frustrated that, they were close, right? They consistently seemed to get halfway there or something and then just fail to quite pull it off the way that they should. And so they've definitely changed gears recently. They've got new leadership there and have really done a full redesign of their lineup. And this is part of that. And I will say this is definitely a huge improvement over the original Flash. And let me add that perhaps that's biasing my review a bit. Perhaps if this knife just came out on its own with a different brand, with a different name, I wouldn't be so impressed by it. But of course, comparing this to the original Flash, it really, really, really does well. Now, I'd like to say, that history aside, I think just in general, this is a pretty decent knife. And so that's going to be my contention as we work our way through this video. Hopefully I'll be able to explain to you why I think that is and why I actually enjoy this a fair bit, despite a couple little things that I'm not absolutely in love with. Okay, so first off, size and weight. You guys know I like the bigger stuff, and this is not huge. Okay, so this is 8 1/4 inches. It's actually just like a hair over 8 1/4 inches. The blade length is 3 7/16. The handle length right here is going to be 4 7/8. This guy weighs in at 4.5 ounces, which is completely reasonable. I should show you it close so you have an idea. So this is the overall length when you're carrying the knife at just under 5 inches, 4.5 ounces in pocket. And then when you do go to grip this knife and use it, you have a full 4 inches of grip area. All right, so pretty generous. By the way, forgive my hands. They're a little dirtier than usual. Not that they're always spotless, but I've been working on the car, and so they're stained and beat up and stuff, and that's just one of those things. So that gives you a quick sort of rundown on the specs on this knife. Let's go ahead and get into some of the details here as we work our way from tip to butt, beginning with this blade. Okay, so come on, focus you. There we go. So you can see we've got a coated D2 blade here. The blade stock is not crazy thick. All right. You can also see that they've labeled it with that studies and observation group. That's kind of part of their new marketing strategy, and you're going to see that on a lot more SOGs. The blade is pretty thin behind the edge. The overall grind, it's a flat grind, but it's pretty thin and enjoyable, and we've got a bit of a drop point here. So what do I think of this blade? Actually, I've got to say I'm pretty darn happy with this blade. D2 steel is not my first choice. Now, being coated, that's going to help to make it a little more stainless and give me a little more confidence in carrying this knife. If you've been watching the channel, you know I've been having some issues with some of my D2 blades rusting because the humidity is just off the charts. And this summer, it's probably, it's partially my mistake. I made the mistake of buying some shorts that have like mesh pockets, meaning all your sweat and humidity from your body has direct access to whatever's in your pockets. Not an ideal solution, but the shorts are very comfortable. I do find, though, whatever knife I carry in there for prolonged periods of time may have some issues with rust. No, so because of that, the coated D2 is a little nicer. And I will say this, I would have preferred to see this done in, 14C28N would be ideal. Now, there's probably a lot of knives where switching the blade to 14C28N would be fantastic. Certainly, I think this is a good candidate because it's trying to come in at a little more budget price range. Okay, so what do I think of this blade? Pretty happy with it. The edge has held up pretty nicely. The coating, as you can see, like there's some very slight marking on it, but you know, the cutting that I've done with this, it's actually held up really, really well. So no complaints about that. And the blade steel has done a good job. And I will say this, historically, whatever else I've said about SOG, and I've been disappointed with them in the past for sure, they tend to do a pretty good job with their blade steel. Like my my AUS 8 from SOG tended to perform a little better than other companies. And that's been the case for other steels as well. So they seem to do a pretty good job on heat treat, whatever else I may have complained about in the past. So yeah, I like this blade. I'm quite happy with it. Let's move on to an area where we can have a little more discussion, and that is on lockup and deployment. So we've got this XR lock, thumb stud deployment. It's an assisted knife. You can see it is very snappy, so I do enjoy that. And here's the thing, guys, if you're going to do an assisted knife, you know, make it snappy, make it fast, because that's what kind of makes it fun. And there is some value to an assisted knife, I think, depending on your situation. Do I prefer something like this? Okay, so this I brought this knife specifically because, you know, there's the deployment of an axis lock that's really, really well done with no assist. And do I enjoy that an awful lot? Yes, absolutely. Do I think it would take something away from this knife if it was assisted? Absolutely. However, when we take a look at this knife here, I don't think the assist, would I buy the knife without it? Yes, I would. I'd be just as happy without the assist. I haven't tried to de-assist this. I don't really feel like, you know, I feel like assist is part of the design here. There's a good chance that it is possible to de-assist this and have it work just fine, although it may mess up the detent. So, that's my little commentary about assisted knives. I made a whole video talking about assisted knives, and essentially the point of my video was I don't hate assisted knives, and I'm not one of those people who, as soon as it has an assist, I'm just going to pass. I enjoy some of them, and this one is kind of enjoyable because it does pop out of there pretty quick, and you know, gives me a legal feeling of having an auto, even though I can't have one in Canada. So that's maybe part of my, you know, secret love of assisted knives as well. All right, the lock works really well. It's very solid. This blade is really, really solid up and down and side to side, so I enjoy that an awful lot. It's fairly easy to deploy, although I will say there's been a couple of times. So if you take a close look here, there's not a ton of lock bar that's accessible. I would have liked to see this, I don't know, reoriented in some way so that I could get my thumb on it just a little easier. Now you can see I'm not having any problems here in this video, but you'll just have to take my word for it that there have been a couple of times in the past where I went to deploy the knife and I was a little sweaty, and or if I'd been deploying it over and over again, you know, my thumb was starting to get a little sensitive and I couldn't get it to deploy because the detent is quite stiff on this. All right, so that's about everything you need to know about lockup and deployment. Notice I'm kind of ignoring this locking feature here. I'm just, you know, this is not something I enjoy, and essentially I just ignore it. I don't use it, I don't bother with it, and you know, so far I leave it alone and it leaves me alone. It's kind of like a bee's nest. I haven't messed with it. I just leave it off, and I've been able to do that. And I will say the one point where I know we're getting ahead of ourselves here. The one thing I will say about it is in use, I don't really find that it interferes with my grip. So if this were, you know, cumbersome and annoying when I was trying to grip the knife, I would have more complaints. But as it sits there, just not really bothering me, you know, it kind of gets a pass. Okay, so lockup and deployment, quite acceptable. Not the best I've seen, but definitely not anything to complain about. Moving on to the handle. We've got blue or a couple of other colors available, FRN over steel liners. You can see there's not really any milling in there, so they could probably save a little bit of weight and get this maybe closer to 4 ounces, but it's not a big deal. 4.5 ounces I don't consider a heavy knife, so I'm not really concerned about that. Very, very deep carry clip here. I have carried this quite a bit, and I've noticed that for whatever reason, it must just be the dimension in here. The old SOG Flash used to have problems where your pants would kind of get stuck up over the blade. This one doesn't seem to do that. You can see it is movable to the other side. Just take this screw out, pop it out, slide it in the other side. Okay, so that's kind of a nice feature. Got a little bit of a lanyard spot there, FRN here as well. Now, normally I would complain about FRN, but they've actually done a really nice job here. It's comfortable. It doesn't feel cheap, which is the reason I would normally be complaining about it. And the grip on it is pretty nice as well. So for all of those reasons, I'm pretty happy with this handle and the construction of it. So no big complaint there either. And finally, ergonomically, I find it quite comfortable. So that's if this were really, really awkward in hand and I didn't enjoy it, you'd definitely be hearing about that. And again, because it's so comfortable, I'm not really going to complain about the fact that it has FRN. Would I prefer to see G10? Theoretically, sure, but I can't really say anything bad about it. Okay, having gotten all that stuff out of the way, let's go ahead and do some comparisons. So let's see here. First off, let's just bring in a pair of two, only because you're familiar with that. Similar size, similar roll as an EDC knife. Obviously this is quite a bit more expensive and you're going to get some nicer materials. And so it's not that comparable in that sense, but at least, for size and for reference should be helpful. Now let's get to a couple of knives that are perhaps more comparable. Here, of course, is a Rat Model 1. So same steel, similar price point. The SOG is going to be a little bit more. And I will say when it comes to that aspect of the comparison, I do have to complain a little. I think this would be, a fantastic knife, like off the charts good for $50 to $60. As it stands, I think it's around $70, and that is a little steep for what you're getting. Although I do like the design and I like a lot of the features of the knife. Here's a steel wheel. This is the steel wheel sedge. And I brought this in because, again, here we have G10 liner lock, D2 steel. So a lot of similar components, and it's around the same price point. Now, it's obviously quite different. It's a much bigger knife. But again, I wanted to kind of bring it in because to show that when you go the extra mile, it's not completely outlandish to hit that $70 price point. Finally, the only Benchmade I have in the collection is my Crooked River. It won't even hardly fit in frame here. There we go. And so I wanted to bring that in just because of the lock comparison. And I will say the axis lock here is quite enjoyable. Now, by all accounts, I've seen a few others talk about the implementation of the AT lock on other knives, and it's actually been pretty good. So there are a few SOGs out there that don't have the assist, and everyone has commented that they've done a pretty nice job with this lock. Probably a close equivalent to a similar Benchmade. Okay, so that is the rundown on the SOG Flash AT. What are my conclusions? Here are my thoughts, guys. I like this knife. I have no issue with it whatsoever. It's comfortable. It works well. I like the blade shape. I like the overall design. I like the construction. Every once in a while, I have a hard time getting a hold of that thumb stud when deploying the knife, but that's a pretty rare thing. And so overall, this is definitely a SOG that I like. I think the design is very attractive, and I find it's quite usable and carryable. So for all those reasons, I can get behind this. I wish SOG would have jumped to this or made this transition earlier, but I really want to encourage them to continue down this road because this is a nice knife. They've done a really good job here. If you've got one of these, let me know down in the comments what your thoughts are. I'd love to hear. I haven't heard any major complaints or failings or anything like that, and I usually do, especially for a week or so leading up to a review, try to kind of put some feelers out and see. And I haven't heard any major issues with this. And so for all those reasons, I find this a pretty easy knife to recommend. I know the cost is a little more, but you know what? Get it from one of the places, one of my channel sponsors, and you can use those discount codes to save yourself a little bit, and that's going to put it more in a ballpark that I'm comfortable with. So there you go. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Let me know what your thoughts are on the new SOG lineup. We'll talk to you soon.